All right, everybody. I want to welcome you to an early edition of Conversations with Commodores. And I appreciate my guest tonight being able to accommodate my early schedule. You guys, I want to introduce to you the big Swede, Eric Soesbe, a member of the 55 Gator Bowl team. Good afternoon, Eric. How you doing, bud?
Hello, Bernard. Hello. I'm glad to join your interview.
Well, you and I have been trying to get together for a couple of months now, and I'm glad we found us a time. And I'm looking forward to our discussion this afternoon.
All right.
Well, guys, before we jump into Eric's story, and it's a great one, I can promise you. How about the Commodores, the Vandy boys last night with the most improbable baseball win I think I've ever seen? And I've been a fan for decades, and I loved every minute of that heart-stopping action. Eric, did you catch the game last night?
I sure did. It was the most unusual finish. It's never happened. I can't imagine anything like that ever happening.
Oh my gosh, it was
especially. It's just incredible.
Oh, it truly was incredible, and I tell you, what was so cool about it is Coach Corbin obviously is an amazing coach and has some outstanding players, but those guys never quit. And it just shows you in sports, you never know what's going to happen, and you play until the game is over. My gosh.
Well, it's certainly outstanding. The final score is 65, right?
That's right. That's right.
It just is unreal the way it happened.
Yep.
You couldn't. First of all, you wondered why or how did it occur? You know, it just seems so improbable. But I think that even the guy in third base, anyway, I think he was stunned. He hardly could start running. He was locked just looking at it.
Well, one of the great things about this is it extends the season. They play tomorrow against NC State. They win until they're in it until they lose. Let's hope that's not until next week, but we get to see Kumar Rocker pitch at least one more time tomorrow at 1 o'clock. So enough about the Vandy boys. Let's talk about the big Swede, native of Tullahoma, Tennessee. Now, where do you call home now, Eric?
I live here still in Tullahoma.
Excellent.
It's been most of my life. I lived in Alaska for the Army tour, lived in Puerto Rico for 5 years in the 60s, moved back here and joined my father and his company in 65, and I've been here since then.
Excellent. Now, how far is Tullahoma from the campus these days?
75 miles.
And that hadn't changed in a while, has it?
No, the only thing that's changed is there's so much traffic in Nashville that we hardly go there any longer.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's talk about life growing up in Tullahoma. Did you play other sports besides football?
Well, I really thought I played. I really wasn't very good at any of the other sports. I was on the baseball team. I was a first baseman, but I didn't do too well. And then I played basketball, but I was a second string. I did it mostly just to improve my athletic skills, just to keep active and be an athlete, hoping that it would improve my football.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure that you probably excelled in those other sports, but maybe not to the point that you thought that you did be accomplished. But was football always your first love and your best sport?
Well, yes, it was, but I got kind of backed into the whole thing. I was really seriously, I was most interested in sending myself to college. My father put himself through school. Mm-hmm. He went to Grinnell College in Iowa, and when he finished, it took him 7 years to get through school. He would work for a year and he'd go to school for a year. He kind of drummed that into me, the work ethic of the 30s and of course, Second World War and so forth. And I had that sort of instilled in me when I was in high school. I felt, how am I going to get through college? Mm-hmm. It was relatively expensive, and any college, much less UT or one of the state schools. And out of the blue, I was offered a scholarship at Vanderbilt. I was dumbfounded. And more importantly, I was more dumbfounded that our little old high school here in Tullahoma would make me qualified to get into the university. I had no inkling that my grades were that adequate, you know.
Well,
But
clearly, Eric, clearly you were on somebody's radar from an athletic standpoint enough to warrant being offered a scholarship. So talk a little bit about your high school experience before going to Vanderbilt.
well, I played mostly for two outstanding college football players. One of them was an All-American at Tennessee Tech. His name was Creed McClure. And his assistant coach was Fred Grider, who was also, by his own right, a lineman. He was a guard, played at Middle Tennessee, but he was an outstanding player in his time, and was also all conference, was All-American of that genre of colleges. And they were both excellent coaches. They really were. And I might say too, I had the third coach there. His name was Jack Thomas. Coach Thomas, we called him Zip because that was an encouraging word that he used on the gridiron all the time. Let's get some zip, boys. Zip, zip, zip. Everything was zip, and that became his nom de plume, so to speak. And anyway, those coaches were really quite. We won the conference championship one year, and we played county schools and larger schools than our high schools, a city school. And we weren't as large as some of those other, county schools had anywhere from 700, 800 students, and we had about 250. And it made lesser candidates for sports. Sure. And so anyway, we were out of our league, you might say, but we won our conference one year. Now, but we played some really outstanding teams. We played Shelbyville, which won the state championship that year. Mm-hmm. And then another time we played Sparta, and they beat the BGGG out of. They beat us and it was snowing, and it was an awful game. They beat us something like 40-0. And as I was leaving the field, and it was a horrible, miserable evening of football, and just being out there wet and sloppy and cold and just awful. As I was leading the game in the field, going through the the opening in the gate, there was Baby Ray, and I recognized him because he was about 6'7", and I'd seen pictures of him and knew that he played for the Green Bay Packers when he was in the Pro Bowl, and I knew that he was a coach at Vanderbilt. And when I came out of the game, I had a pretty good game, even though we lost so badly. But I kept making an effort to do the best I could, even though we were just getting the devil out of us.
Sure, sure.
And he said, "Good game, Soesbe." And that, I think, was maybe the moment. You might say, what do you call it? That was the one thing I think. That game, I think, is the reason I got a Vanderbilt scholarship.
That game put you on the map.
Well, I think it did, because he was there, number one. Second, he was a lineman. He knew that I was continuing to make an effort, even though we were losing our tails. Mm-hmm. And I guess he liked that aspect of my game. Well, so
let me ask you this, Eric.
I was flabbergasted. Vanderbilt, I had been offered a scholarship to go to Auburn. Uh-huh. And two other smaller schools, Grinnell, as I mentioned, and University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and a school in Indiana. But when I heard Vanderbilt, I said, "What? I can't even get in that school. What do you mean offered a scholarship?" Well, they wouldn't have offered it, but he couldn't get in.
Well, you must have qualified somehow.
Well, I hadn't even thought of it. I just was dumbfounded. So anyway.
Had you visited Vanderbilt prior to that time?
No, well, I've been going to games as a senior in high school. I enjoyed to see the games,
right?
But I wasn't a recruit,
right? But you had been on campus and at least seen some of the sites.
No, it was the year that Bill Edwards was the coach in that fall, mm-hmm. and he had been in that December he was fired. And it was a transition period, and their recruiting was kind of, you might say, off the map. In other words, it was just very scattered. By that I mean to say that, between coach changes and whatnot, there was bedlam. And consequently, the recruiting was just, my first exposure was going down there to sign the darn agreement.
Wow.
I mean, seriously, just about, I forget, quite frankly, I honestly don't remember too much about it. But I know my dad was with me, and he could hardly believe it either, to tell you the truth. But he was quite, he was proud of the situation that I was getting in. But
no pressure for you by him to go to his alma mater.
Oh no. He didn't have time for sports in college, not at all. He was busy he painted water towers and farmers' barns with a built-in, a homemade spray operation with a truck and a tank and a pump. And he sprayed city tanks and water towers and barns and things like that. And that's how he put himself through college. But he was just as dumbfounded as I was. So he went down. He was, how can I say, wise enough to realize that the scholarship was not a 4-year scholarship.
Right.
It was a single year. Every one of our scholarship had to be re-signed each year. But all the other guys thought it was a 4-year scholarship. Right. Well, the tacit agreement was that it was 4 years, but it was not. It was a 1 year. Dad insisted on knowing whether or not it was 4 years or 1 year. And they finally had to fess up and tell him it was a year to year to year.
Yeah, they may have underestimated what he
put the pressure on. That put the pressure on me again.
Yeah. Well, Eric, when did you? Did you sign your paperwork? Would that have been in the spring of your senior year of high school?
As I remember, it was right in December.
Oh, it's a little earlier.
Well, I don't recall it. It was December or January. I think it was December. I really don't know. I don't recall.
That's okay. Now, when it came time to report to school, either that summer or that fall for football camp, what were your first impressions about showing up to play football? And there's a whole bunch of other Vanderbilt freshmen showing up. And what was that like for you?
Well, I won't say it was frightening. I was like a sheep, and I was a little bit out of place, I thought. Here are all these other guys that I know played for county schools and bigger high school, had larger contingents. And anyway, I just felt like I was a lost ball in high weeds. And that's a golf expression, At any rate, that's what I felt like. I sort of watched my P's and Q's because I wanted to fit in, but I didn't want to do too much too loudly. So,
well, Eric, who was the head coach your freshman year?
It came to be Art Guepe. Art Guepe was a Marquette graduate. Frankly, I don't recall very much of his previous coaching records, but he was the coach there. And his twin brother, he had a twin brother that came along also. His name was Al Guepe. And Al was a backfield coach, like defensive backs.
Sure.
And his genre and his forte.
Well, I should have asked you early in the conversation, with your nickname being the Big Swede, I want to know the origin story, if you know. How did you come about with that nickname?
Well, when I was on campus after I'd been through my freshman year, there was a lady on the campus that did the program covers. And she was quite good. She did their kind of a cartoonish effect of the Commodore mascot. And well, the one with the hat that tips. There's the picture. I don't know if I can show you the picture behind me or not, but can you see it in there?
I can.
Anyway, I had a talent of doing cartoons and just various sketches and things like that I had done my Christmas cards all my life. And so I went down to Pete Naylor, was not Pete. I think his name as we speak, but he was the publicity director. And he was in charge of taking care of the programs. He sold the ads and did whatever necessary to get the thing published. And he was in charge of accepting this lady's submissions for covers. And I wanted to do that. And so I asked him about it. And he said, well, give me a couple of renditions of what you might suggest. So I drew up a couple and colored them, and turns out that he liked, and she was graduating and he was going to have to do something anyway. Sure. So in my sophomore year, I began submitting and winning the eye of this guy, Scoop Hudgens. That was his name. Scoop, good name for a publicity director. Anyway, Scoop was well known and quite a character. And we was back when we were in the old Palmer house, and the little sort of a stone building next to it. I don't remember exactly what the name of it was, but it was just an office building next to the Palmer house. And that was where his offices were. And so that's how I got the name Swede. I didn't want to put my name down there because back then they were pretty stringent or pretty tough on the university getting paid for anything. So I put what do you call it, an anonymous name at the bottom. And I had people wonder whether I was a Norwegian or whether I was Scandinavian because I was blonde and so forth. And I just went along for the ride, whatever people thought. I'd let them think it. I didn't say, no, I'm not. Right. Actually, Welsh, English Welsh. But nevertheless, I just let it be assumed. So I started using the name Swede. And so the guys on the football team got a hold of that. And that's what became my plume, or we call it nom de plume on the field.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. Guys, I've posted.
I did the basketball and football programs for 3 years.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Eric has previously sent to me some of those covers, and you guys have seen them. I've posted them in the Facebook group. And so there's at least 3 or 4 in there. Those are fantastic. But the Swede, the big Swede, that's an awesome nickname. And Eric, while I'm taking a little pause, we got a few folks who have joined us. I want to say hello to one fellow who you may be familiar with, Tyler Unzicker, is watching us, and he says to tell you hello.
Hey, Tyler.
And we got another Tyler Chastain, one of my buddies who practices law in Knoxville, has joined us. And there's some others who've rolled through. So thank you, fellas, for showing up. I'm talking with the big Swede, Eric Soesbe, a member of the 55 Gator Bowl team. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. But I want to talk about your freshman experience of knocking heads in college. What was that like, going from the high school game to the SEC college game?
Yeah, well, in our freshman year, we had, we weren't eligible, number one, to play on the varsity. So we had a B team, and we were just the fodder for the practices for the varsity team, basically. But we would have games with other schools that would be of the same, the SEC didn't permit freshmen to play except during these kinds of contests.
Sure.
Among ourselves, we didn't have too many, how can I say, we had a few guys that were outstanding players, not to say they weren't, but we all were in the same how can I say, the mess, because none of us knew what we're getting into. I mean, it was all of us first exposure to college football.
Sure.
And when we come out to play against the big boys, it was really kind of nervous, playing against some of the better players like Pete Williams and some of the Larry Frank as an example, and other upperclassmen that were far more attuned to playing the SEC quality football. we got, we got quite a good dose of that before we became eligible as sophomores.
Well, is Eric practicing against, I'll call them the varsity, and you guys are the freshman team. Practicing against that varsity, did it prepare you guys for some of your freshman games where you played during that season?
Well, our coach, he was more interested in running the offense and defense of the next opponent.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what we were learning. We were learning how to run the play to duplicate what the next opponent for the varsity team would be.
So you were the scout team, in a sense.
That's essentially, I was looking for the words, but that's essentially what we were. And we would get our experience by substituting each other as freshmen, and some sophomores, as a matter of fact, were on that B team as well. But
did you find any success personally for yourself going up against those older guys as the season went on? Either you were learning techniques or you were getting stronger. I didn't know if you guys were lifting weights during the season, or you were just becoming more accustomed to college football.
That's what it was. We didn't really have a training program per se. That was not something that we did organized. We didn't have any real programs back then. You sort of did those things on your own. Mm-hmm. And so I elected to wrestle because I thought wrestling would help me learn a balance and a certain amount of foot speed and agility. And so I went out for wrestling. And one of the reasons I did, you might say I wanted to brown nose a little bit, but Coach Baby Ray, had wrestled pro, and he coached also the wrestling team when he could get the time to do it. He would come in there and give some pointers and tell us how. He wasn't the coach per se, but he would give us a lot of his ideas, and it was a way for me to get more familiar with Coach Ray and to kind of show myself with him, that sort of thing. And aggressiveness, he teaches you aggressiveness too.
Yeah.
So I think having done that my freshman, sophomore, and junior years, it put me a little bit out front, so to speak, as a lineman.
Sure.
And I believe too that it helped balance and quickness and let's say foot speed and things like that, which a lineman needs. Not so much, not the 100 type speed, but within the confines of 10 or 15 yards is when you really need to be quick.
Certainly. I certainly understand that. Let's go away from football for just a minute or two and talk about academics. Playing football in the SEC, particularly at Vanderbilt, is hard enough, but there are certain standards and expectations at Vanderbilt and have been for decades and decades. How did you find the academics part of freshman and sophomore years?
Well, I spent quite a bit of time studying, let's face it, but I didn't reach too deeply either. I took Spanish. I took courses that I thought that I could keep my grades up in.
Sure.
And at that time too, in order to be a college student, you had to make some sort of declaration about your draft status. So most all of us didn't have a deferral unless you were a student involved in ROTC.
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to differentiate. I want to make sure that you guys understand when Eric's talking about draft status, he's not talking about the NFL draft. He's talking about the military draft. This is in the early 50s.
I wasn't thinking on that regard.
Yeah.
I think you interrupted me on that.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to go into the service and break my contract with the Vanderbilt playing football. And furthermore, I didn't want to not have college experience before going into some kind of service requirement.
Sure.
Because most eligible men at that time served 2 years in the service and 6 years in reserve, whether you wanted to or not.
Right.
And which I might add, that's too bad they don't still do that. It would change the makeup of this culture that we're in right now quite a bit. but nevertheless, neither here nor there. I took Spanish, I took physics, I took English, I took the arithmetic courses, algebra and geometry and those kinds of courses. I took art appreciation. I took courses that I could pass. And it turns out that ROTC was a favorable subject for me. As a matter of fact, I graduated with honors in the military. I didn't intend to, but it was a good place to get good grades. I got A's in military, and that brought my grade point average up quite a bit. And I got A's all through the entire program.
You remained eligible to play football because of your grades. I know that there was requirements back then, but everybody adjusts academically differently. Some people come from very strong academic backgrounds, other not as much. But what remains is that standard at Vanderbilt and the high requirements. Now, when you were playing in the 50s, we did not have, let's see, let me get my straight. I don't know if you can see over this shoulder, you can see the football field, but McGugan is just over that shoulder. Now, if you go, let's see, the other way, I can't get all this straight. Back there behind, let's see, up there, somewhere over there is the Palmer Field House on the other side of the stadium.
Is it still there?
Somebody who's watching needs to help me out, but it may still be standing as of a couple of years.
Behind your right shoulder is the north end of the field. And it was behind the stands, the Palmer Fieldhouse. I think it's been taken down, but that's where it was. It was just behind those end zone bleachers is where the Palmer Fieldhouse was.
Well, what was in the Palmer Fieldhouse is my question.
Well, the coaches' offices, and as I mentioned, the publicity, my director, he was in there, and secretaries. I presume, I don't believe the athletic director was. As a matter of fact, the athletic director I think he was Art Guepe, to tell you the truth. I don't even know who the athletic director was in 55 and 54. I don't know. But I think it was Art Guepe, I believe. Nevertheless, it was an office building. We had no functions in there whatsoever, not even team meetings or any kind of squad meetings or anything like that.
Where was the locker room, clubhouse? Where did you have your meetings?
Well, wait a minute. I'm confusing things. There were two buildings. I beg your pardon. There was two buildings.
Okay.
One was that stone office building that I just momentarily had mentioned it. The Palmer House was the field house that we housed the team, the dressing quarters, and the showers, and the medical room for what was his name? Anyway, our medical specialist.
Dr. Pinky Lipscomb?
Well, Pinky was the physician, and he's the one that corrected my nose. He didn't do too well either, but never.
Looks okay from here.
What was his anyway? We'll think of it as I speak here with you.
Sure.
But it'll come up in a minute. Pete's what was his name? He was
It'll come to you.
Well, the equipment manager was a crippled person. He had polio, and he was a very crippled person. He was the manager of the equipment room, strict as he could be, and wouldn't let you have but one set of jock strap and one change of athletic socks, and he was really strict.
Yeah.
You could bring him a pair of athletic socks that had got mud up from the rainstorm that we just left on the practice field, and expect to get a change, and no, shake them out. That's all. He was very much of a pinch. What do you call it?
Sure.
Pinch.
Well, they probably had a very limited budget.
He did. There's no question. He really ran the show on that. what was his name? I'm trying to think of the guys. Oh, Lord of mercy. That'll come up in a second.
That's okay. Let's pivot for just a little bit, Eric. Let's talk about you playing in the games. Was it fun? Were you nervous? Were you the type that had a light stomach and threw up, or were you ready to go? What were the actual games like for you?
Well, my biggest concern was remembering my plays, remembering what to do in certain circumstances, my assignments in changing circumstances. That was really what I was most nervous about. I won't call it nerves. It was just that I was more concerned about remembering what I'm supposed to do. Now, I didn't dress out until I was a sophomore, and I was about third string or something like that. I didn't even. I think I was in the game one time enough to ruin a year of eligibility, so to speak. But I dressed out for all the games as a team member. When we traveled, I was along for the ride, but just to fill the bus up, basically.
Now, what year were you for the Gator Bowl season? 55.
I was 1955, and that's the year that I broke my arm in pre-season practice. I broke my arm against the headgear of another tackle, Tommy Woodruff, and I was using, just a leverage shot. We were one-on-one practicing, and he was trying to submarine. I swung at him in his headgear and broke my forearm. So, and it was about the 11th day of practice. So that was unfortunate for me in some respects, except I did get the 5th year, the 57, which turned out to be a favorable situation for me. But nevertheless, that year they went to the Gator Bowl and won the game, and I got Pete Naylor, that was his name. Pete Naylor gave me 2 tickets, one for my mother, one for me to go to Jacksonville. we had to buy my sister's and my dad's tickets, and we sat up in the damn stands. I mean, you could hardly see the field from where we sat. Oh boy! Think about complimentary tickets. He was just a noted Scrooge.
Yeah, there you go. Well, that season, that was a pretty magical season, because I think that was either only the first or second bowl game.
First game, yeah, the first bowl game
that Vanderbilt had ever attended.
Yeah, the first.
If I remember correctly, wasn't that against Auburn?
Yeah, we beat them 25-13, and I was just reviewing that before coming on with you, and I hadn't remembered that we were really fortunate to win that game, but we recovered 5 fumbles in that game.
Wow!
That's in a nutshell. That's why we won. But it means that we were playing terrific defense too. I mean, we had some outstanding defensive players. Several of them went into pro ranks, and they were just playing stupendous. Really, they played an outstanding game. Auburn was like 8th in the nation or something at the time. I don't know, but they were a very seasoned, top quality SEC team. And to beat them, that was Art Guepe's feather.
Let's move past that season into your 4th and 5th years. And what position were you playing, and how much time did you get? What was that like for you after you had healed your arm?
Well, the next season after 55, I began getting more playing time with the other 2 or 3 tackles that we kind of switched back and forth. I was playing left tackle, and the right tackle they were switching back and forth pretty regularly, and it turned out that I was playing left tackle most all the time. And it turned out to be it would have been my junior year as a senior in 56. And we had a good season. I think it was 5-5 or something of that nature. We had a reasonable season. We unfortunately lost to UT.
Right.
When Johnny Majors was playing his best football. and we lost again in 57. But we played close in those two games. While I was in school, we only won one time, and at Dudley Field in 1954. We beat them 26-0 at Dudley Field. And Majors hadn't gotten into his full speed by that time yet. He was a sophomore. He incidentally, Johnny Majors came from Middle Tennessee, and he just right down the holler from where we live here in Tullahoma. Right. And I had known him all my life from very young age of 8, 9 years old. We knew each other very closely, and we both joined the same fraternity at UT and at Vanderbilt. So I knew him personally quite well, and enjoyed watching his season and his game as a how can you say, a fan of football.
Sure. Well, Eric, when your eligibility was up after your final season, did you have aspirations to play professionally?
Well, not really. No, I knew my limits, and I didn't weigh with about 215 pounds, and that's not pro weight, number one. And I didn't have speed. That was the second thing that I lacked. I'm talking about just literal running speed. I didn't have that kind of speed. So I knew I was not going to play. But what really shocked me is that I got drafted by the Chicago Cardinals.
Well, that's where I was going to go. How did you find out?
It seemed like I was way down the list. I don't know, 4 or 5 selections down. Good gosh, I don't know how it happened. That's another one of those things, and I had no idea. But I think it had something to do with maybe Ray, to tell you the truth. I think he was saying, look, here's a guy that plays really close to the vest as far as paying attention to what he's supposed to do. And, I was an adequate player, and they must have thought so, because the Cardinals, incidentally and strangely enough, they left Chicago the very next season, went to St. Louis, became the St. Louis Cardinals.
Did you do a tryout with the team? Did you practice with them or anything?
No, I never got that far along. I knew that I wasn't up to that standard. I just knew I wasn't. And furthermore, I had the obligation of going into service.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, if that took precedent.
I was already a second lieutenant when we graduated. And even though I got distinguished military graduate, that's what I was trying to think of earlier. But even though I had that compliment, when I played the 57 season as a second lieutenant, quite frankly, I didn't go to reserve or anything, but I already had my orders. Wow. My orders were the next year in March to go to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. So I was already in the service with the deferment, because I was a student still. I went to law school for a year. To be eligible in the SEC, you had to be a student. So I was
going to ask you, what did you do academically? And you've addressed.
Well, yeah, I went to my buddy, another tackle that had the same thing happen with him in a different way, Pat Swan. Pat and I both went to law school, and we both decided that was not a study we wanted to pursue.
Well, at least you recognized it at that point. And guys, I'm talking with Eric Soesbe, the big Swede, a member of the 55 Gator Bowl team. And Eric, I'm really enjoying our conversation. And we've got a little bit of time left. I hope you've got a little time to go. Are you good for a few more minutes?
Oh, certainly.
Well, let's talk about after you left. You graduated, you did your year of law school, which wasn't for you. You get drafted, but you don't in the NFL, but you don't go. But you had obligations with the military. Ultimately, when you came out of the military, what was your profession? What did you end up doing after that?
Well, my father was in the leather business, and he had a company that made leather garments, and also a tannery that made the leather for the garments. And it was too good an opportunity for me not to pursue. After all, there it was. The company was already running, and his his investment was already solid with the company, and I'd be foolish as a son not to join my dad. Arithmetically speaking, I mean, good gracious. And so, and I like the idea of being into the leather business. So it happened that after I finished my service obligation, I still had 6 years of reserve, but we had started a company down in Puerto Rico, and the company there was making leather garments. And the idea of me going there to start a tannery was to make the leather for those garments. So we'd have a completely vertical situation, making the goods from the leather from my own tannery. And I started a tannery in Puerto Rico that I addressed for 5 years. We finally had an opportunity to sell the tannery, which I won't go into that story, but it was an opportunity to divest ourselves from that investment. And we did so, and I came back to Tennessee.
Well, Eric, I'm hearing that you had some connection to Major League Baseball during that time.
Well, what happened is my father was already running the tannery, but he had been in another tannery prior to him starting his own tannery that made baseball leather. And while they didn't make baseball leather for the major leagues, the company that recognized my dad's name, being in the requirement of baseball being covered, I mean, the cover of the ball being leather.
Sure.
He recognized my father's name, and he immediately said, didn't you used to make baseball leather down at Lamb's, the other company that he worked for? And Dad said, yes. He said, well, what do we talk about making this other kind of leather for? We need to be speaking about making baseball leather. And Dad said, well, I don't know. It's been a long time since I was involved in that. Sure. He said, you can get back into it, can't you? And Dad said, well, sure, I guess I could. Well, he didn't have any obligations or any contract with them. So when I came back from Puerto Rico, the first year and a half or 2 years that I was with my dad's company, I spent that time on the experimental laboratory that we had, learning how to make baseball leather. And we finally made it to where it was satisfactory enough to meet the requirements of the major leagues. And of course, we had to go through a lot of testing, and I won't go into that story, but it was quite rewarding. We became providers of the major league leather for the cover of the ball.
Oh, how cool.
And, yeah, the other company was getting old and wasn't doing quite what they, there was a flap, how can I say, in the major leagues of the leather not being up to par from the other tannery. And furthermore, the game was becoming so expensive with the baseball being covered with horsehide, which was required by the rules of the game, that we were able to make it from cowhide. So just because of the fact that horses were becoming very scarce, and the hides from the horses from Europe were becoming very expensive. So we said, well, let's learn how to make it from cowhide, which I was involved in very, very closely. And we did that. And what we did, we finally made the leather which we felt was satisfactory. But in order to prove it, the major leagues said, well, look, what we'll do is we'll sew up a whole bunch of balls and we'll use them all during the spring practice. So they made, I don't know, maybe 500 or more and passed them out in the spring practice games. And not a single pitcher or batter or catcher or anybody doubted that they thought it was horse. I didn't know. They didn't know that the league, the national and American leagues were trying this out to see whether they could make that change. And nobody noticed that not a soul knew, the players or the umpires, that it was cowhide. So the league said, well, who are we fooling here? We don't. So they made the rule read horsehide or cowhide. The next season, it was all the balls were made in cowhide. and it has been that way since.
Wow, what a cool story. That's
But
awesome. That's
we,
awesome.
we were responsible for that switchover.
Who knew? Thank
And
you for that, Tyler.
it was
Uh,
it was the Rawlings company.
Sure.
They were the ones that pushed that particular development, and we worked with them closely. And they were eventually bought out by Spalding, as you may know.
Well, Eric, we've got time for really one more topic, and I want to bring us into the present day. Coach Clark Lee, our new coach, the modern game. Do you still follow college football?
Oh, certainly, certainly I do. Yes.
And do you recognize this version of college football in comparison to the days when you were playing?
Listen, the game is totally different. It really is. It's faster. The guys are bigger. They're stronger. Honestly, we were just a different game, and it was the same competitiveness. I don't mean that we didn't make the same effort and do the best we could, just like they do today. But the game was not anywhere near the speed that it is today. There were complexities, and the off-season training and all that was a lot more complex today than it was back when I was playing.
Well, I was going to say, it doesn't matter what decade you play, there's a lot of similarities. There's still 11 on each side. There's still leather football, all of those things. Yeah. The dedication to the craft, all of that is going to be regardless of your decade. But you're right. Of course, each year it's bigger, faster, and stronger. Let me ask you this, Eric. What are you hoping to see this year on the field from Coach Clark Lee's first team?
Oh, boy. Let me think how I can answer. That's a pretty broad question. I'd like to see interior linemen on the offense be more, well, I shouldn't say better coach, but more attention to the interior linemen doing. It's quite a difficult job on a football team to block a defensive lineman or anybody else, that a linebacker or whatever assignment you may have. As a lineman, you're very disadvantaged. You can't use your hands, well, I'm going back to our day, but you're quite disadvantaged in what you can do and what you cannot do. And I just hope that Coach Lee can hopefully get some coaches, or a coach or two or three coaches, that make an emphasis on blocking and positioning and remembering what they're supposed to do and being able to recognize defenses so that they go in the right place and, position themselves well. The science hasn't changed that much. I'll say this, you can, even an older guy like myself can still recognize when somebody puts their head on someone. And I still like to see a good block or a good tackle. And you see, sometimes I get a feeling that we see a little bit less of that today than we did back when we were playing. But that's just an opinion.
Yeah. Any chance? I
really want to see more emphasis on offensive line techniques.
Well, very, very good. And gosh, I loved your insight, Eric. Any chance you'd be able to watch a game inside the stadium this year, or do you prefer not to go to the games in person?
Well, I have I won't call it a handicap, but I have to use a walker at the moment. And I'd have to get what you call that special privilege of going up the elevator and so forth. I don't know if I want to go through all that rigmarole of getting to the game and having to fight the crowds with a walker. And just that I'll do what I can. It depends on circumstances.
So you're saying there's a chance that you might get to go to a game. You didn't say no.
No, you said Tyler was on earlier. He and I went to a game a couple of years ago in Middle Tennessee. But at my age, I'm still somewhat limited, to get up and down the bleachers and get positioned. I don't know. It's just quite a wrestling match. And today, most of the games are covered by TV.
I was going to say the technology is a real strong push to stay.
So it's been it's just been a interesting chat with you, and I appreciate this opportunity to talk about old times. It's the game is still the same, let's face it, but there's a lot of nuances and a lot of we call it small things that still happen, that still occur. You like to see a good block, you love to see a good tackle, you love to see somebody put a lick on another guy, you know, that's just a good, crisp, clean block. That permits the running back to get free. Just those things they don't change.
Well, guys, if you're on the current team, if you're watching this, the big Swede challenges you to put a big lick on somebody across from you. Eric, I have so enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you for making some time.
Well, we all of us from Vanderbilt appreciate your efforts to expose the Commodores and to expose the new team led by Coach Lee. And of course, we all would wish him the very best 2021 season.
Well, and hopefully we'll get back to some normalcy with full stadiums and a very active and athletic team.
Yeah.
Well, guys, as we do every Thursday, it's Conversations with Commodores, and the big Swede, Eric Soesbe, was such a great discussion today. So thank you, Eric, again. Don't forget, 1 o'clock tomorrow Central, the Vandy boys are taking on North Carolina State Wolfpack in the World Series. And you guys have a good week, a safe week, and we'll catch you next weekend. Anchor down.